It's a bestseller, and many workplaces are requiring it. Many churches are recommending it. So, Neil, talk to us a little bit about Ms. D'Angelo. What are her credentials to write on this subject? And tell us a little bit about her worldview, her perspective, her come from.
Sure. So she is, according to her website, a critical race and social justice educator. She has a PhD in multicultural education from the University of Washington. And she really is just doing what she calls critical social justice. She's written 3 published books, all of which I've read. It's White Fragility, Is Everyone Really Equal with Aslan Sensoy, and then What Does It Mean to Be White? So those are her 3 books, and I've read a number of her peer-reviewed articles as well. She's published peer-reviewed articles. The phrase white fragility comes from a 2011 article, I believe, in the International Journal of Critical Pedagogy. So that's her background.
Mm-hmm. What is her religious background? Because so many pastors are recommending this. Is she a Christian?
I looked it up and I couldn't find anything about her personal beliefs. So I just don't know. She definitely, in her writing, like I've read hundreds of pages of her work now, and maybe even 1,000 or so. And she makes no reference to any kind of spirituality. So I just don't know.
Gosh, I have to look back at exactly what I read, but she's a universalist.
Okay.
I actually read something that she is a universalist and has a degree from a universalist kind of seminary or something like that.
Okay.
But yeah, universalism is her.
Do you mean Unitarian or Unitarian Universalist? That's a thing.
Yes, it has. All I know is universalist, because I didn't know what a universalist was.
Okay, she's starting seminary on Monday.
On Tuesday.
Yeah.
So yes, I will learn about what a universalist is.
All right. So Neil, our second question is, maybe you could talk to us about the book's kind of big idea. What is it that she is trying to argue or put forth?
So her big idea is that all whites are racist and fragile. So I'm going to just quote from the book, page 2. Socialized into a deeply internalized sense of superiority that we either are unaware or can never admit to ourselves. She's saying we white, she's white. We become highly fragile in our conversations about race. We consider a challenge to our racial worldview as a challenge to our very identities as good moral people. That leads to reactions such as anger, fear, and guilt, and behaviors such as argumentation, silence, and withdrawal. And then in page 149, 150, she says, a positive white identity is an impossible goal. White identity is inherently racist. White people do not exist outside the system of white supremacy. So what she does is not pretend that she's not white, because you can't do that. Pretend to be not white and to be just Irish or Italian is to be, in her words, colorblind racist. So what does she do? She says, rather, I strive to be less white. To be less white is to be less racially oppressive, page 150. So there are 2 sort of dual theses are all whites are racist, and then secondly, all whites are fragile, meaning they get defensive when you talk about race, and that leads them to deny or to argue or to withdraw from conversation.
Do you think this is some kind of internalized racism against
on her part?
Yes. Do you think that she's because I'm trying to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she has some kind of internalized racism going on that's leading her to participate this way? Or is that just too big of a stretch and I just got to carry on?
It's kind of like a trope out there on Twitter of people that are critics of D'Angelo saying, she's just straight up racist. She has some issues that she's working through, some personal demons that she's projecting on everyone else. And I was kind of like, let's be fair and charitable here. We don't know that. But I will say some of the stories that she reports about her own inner experiences are pretty weird. I'll just put it that way. She says things like, I found myself at a table with all black people at work and I was terrified. They're all black and I'm white, and what am I going to do? And she talks about how she went to dinner with a black couple and began telling them a story about how racist her own grandmother was and how she's not like that. And then afterwards, she was petrified. She was really upset because she realized that she made them very uncomfortable throughout the evening dinner. I'm like, yeah, no duh. But the point is just that I'm not gonna. I don't know what she's like as a person. But I do think she tells some stories that are unusual, right? So I'm not going to accuse her of being racist or of projecting it, but it does seem that she says in her own story that she did grow up in with racist relatives who had racist views, and that presumably, and she will say that colored the way that she sees people of color. She says that.
What do you think is helpful about this book? Because, I mean, this book is being widely recommended and
on bestseller lists,
even required now in some workplaces. People are writing to us, their employers are requiring it. Some people on church staffs are writing to us saying that they're required reading. So what do you see about this book that could be helpful?
So it's a real struggle for me to find things that are actually helpful in this book, because I think Christians tend to read this book through a Christian worldview, and that leads them to actually misinterpret what she's saying. So I've seen people say things like, all she's saying is that we should be humble when talking about race. And I'm scratching my head and saying, did you read the book? Because she's not saying that. She doesn't say that, we should just be humble. She's saying that you are racist, period. And if you deny that you're racist, it's because you're fragile, and that fragility is part of your racism. That's what she's saying over and over and over again. And if you read her other peer-reviewed work, she's just very clear. She says that in one of her books called, it's called let me look it up. It's called the Beyond the Face of Race, Emo-Cognitive Explorations of a White Neurosis and Racial Cray-Cray. That's the title of this peer-reviewed paper. And she says things like, raising white children to be white is a form of child abuse.
Oh,
wow.
That's so sad.
Now, again, she's redefined those words in unusual ways, but she is really saying that the way that white people raise their children, in other words, the way they naturally raise their children, the way to think about race, that is a form of child abuse that leads to white neurosis and racial cray-cray. So I think Christians need to just reread the book and just read her as she actually presents herself, not reinterpreting her through your own lens. And so now, could I step back and say, well, can I take anything from the book, even if she didn't necessarily intend it that way? Well, yeah, I would say, does white fragility exist? Well, in one sense, because what she's really talking about is human fragility. We're all fragile. We're all defensive. We all feel like we get attacked. We want to defend ourselves.
That's what Monique's been saying.
This is what I've been saying.
Oh, there you go. See, great minds think alike.
This is what I've been saying. She's talking about human emotions. You walk up to me and you call me out my name and you tell me I'm a racist, and you're going to get all of it.
Is that like a deep insight that we have to pay $12 to Amazon to get? No, it's like in 5 seconds. We're all fragile. We're all defensive. We all rationalize our sin, and we're all sinners. But I just told you that for free, and it took me 10 seconds. But that's not all that she means. She's viewing reality through a very different lens than the one that we're viewing reality through. So,
well, if you want to go on the road, we can go on the road and charge everybody $12. I ain't mad at you.
I think she's making it quite a bit more than $12.
Right. This is, I'm like, we trying to give you some word for free, y'all. This is free word. This is good stuff. Okay. Is there anything that you, and I know there is, what would you say are like the main contradictions between this book and the Christian worldview?
Yeah, there are just so many. You can read my book reviews and my just quotes from her own writing. I don't even comment on some of the, I just put the quotes out there because, like they said, they're so cray-cray. The first big problem is that, like many critical race theorists, she doesn't view racism primarily as a sin, but as a system. So she would say all whites are socialized into a racist system and therefore have deeply racist patterns, deeply racist behaviors, a deeply racist worldview. They are racist, period. But in chapter 5, she has an entire chapter called Beyond the Good Bad Binary, where she says, look, the problem is we still think that being racist is bad. It's not that we can't help it. It's not bad. We can't help it. We're all racist. So we have to move beyond this either good equals not racist, bad equals racist binary, and see that we're all on the spectrum. And once we do that, we'll see that racism is really just a thing we can't control, but we can fight against it. We're responsible to unlearn our racist patterns and commit ourselves to a lifelong process of adopting an anti-racist identity. But at no point do we just move beyond that. She says, like, I'm still struggling to not be racist, and it's going to be a lifetime process to be not racist. Here's the thing. So one is she's talking about racism like its original sin. It's this stain on your soul, but the funny thing is she doesn't consider you to be guilty for it. Whereas Christians would say, actually, racism is primarily a sin, and so you need to repent and turn to Jesus and ask for cleansing. But she says, like sin, it's everywhere, and it's in you all the time, but you're not responsible for it. You're not guilty for it, and yet you're now compelled to spend your whole life trying to wash out that damn spot, right? That's it. So it's bizarre, but I think fundamentally Christians should say no. Racism is a sin. It's a sin of partiality towards one's own, quote unquote race. Races are social constructs, but whatever. But we would see racism as a sin, and also, of course, that's why anyone can be racist. Whites can be racist, blacks can be racist, Asians can be racist, because it's not about power or systems, it's about sin. So that's one big problem with her view of all of these issues. Another one is that she views being an oppressor or an oppressed person as really part of who you are. You simply are an oppressor. She says this much more in her other books, like Is Everyone Really Equal? But whites and men and heterosexuals and the rich, by definition, by the virtue of being in an oppressor group, are oppressors, period. And people of color, women, LGBTQ people, the poor, they are oppressed, period. So even people like very, very wealthy, powerful black women are oppressed, period. So, and there are a number of problems with that, but the big one would be how you think about church. Christians cannot walk into a church and look at brothers and sisters in Christ and say, oppressor, 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 oppressed, oppressed, oppressor, oppressed. No, we can't do that.
This is
Once again, right here,
our
right
girl has been
here.
saying.
This is what I've been saying. I am not holy enough to come to church and sit next to you knowing you're my oppressor. We not going for tea, coffee, Chipotle. I'm not going to lunch with you if I have to sit next to you and you're my oppressor. But that's the only option.
It seems like it would fundamentally ruin Christian unity.
Oh yeah.
No, there's no unity.
How do you get there?
We'll get to that in the last two books, I think. But yeah, that's another third point here, is that it leads to disunity and real paranoia, and it makes people miserable. So, for example, on page 80 to 81, she says this is incredible, but I think she's take her at her words. We take her at her words. Whites see their friendship with blacks as proof that they are on the non-racist side of the good-bad binary. Yet cross-racial friendships do not block out the dynamics of racism in the society at large, and these dynamics continue unabated. Racism invariably manifests itself within cross-racial friendships as well. Racism cannot be absent from your friendship. No cross-racial relationship is free from the dynamics of racism in the society. And that last sentence was interesting because she went from saying friendship to relationship. I'm thinking, what about an interracial married couple? Right? Because what she's saying here is you think your relationship is racism free, but it is not. It is everywhere. Elsewhere, she says, the question is not, did racism take place, but how did racism manifest in this particular context? Mm-hmm. It is everywhere and in your friendship. So you talk about, well, how would a person of color, if they truly believed that, how would they view their white friends? Because according to D'Angelo, every action the white person performs is a way for them to maintain their racial dominance, to recover what she calls their racial equilibrium.
Yep.
This is insanity. I mean, you would walk around being utterly paranoid and bitter and angry. Like you said, Monique, the people you're sitting next to, they claim to love you and be your brother in Christ, but they're just trying to maintain their dominance over you all the time, every day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
This is what I've been saying. But people are like, no, she don't mean it like that. No, you should give it another try. Give it another try. No.
You got to read it. So I said, people read this book and I think they're trying to be charitable. But my point is, if you read, I've read all 3 of her books and like 6 of her peer-reviewed papers. She really means what she says.
Yes.
This
Yes.
is really it.
And she really in White Fragility lists out basic emotions. Like she starts the book with her being in a meeting and, someone like in the meeting or something like that is upset or asks questions and she doesn't understand like, well, why aren't you seeing this too? Like it's because you're fragile. You're asking questions because you're fragile. And I'm just like, no, he's asking questions because he's a human. Because nobody just wants to be all racist-y. I mean, unless you do, and then that's a problem. But yeah, no.
This isn't on our list, but I'm curious, is this book like really well researched, documented, and noted with lots of peer-reviewed articles to prove her thesis?
I mean, no. I mean, there's virtually no empirical data behind her claims like at all. Now, do people have implicit biases? Yeah, there's some studies on that.
Sure.
Now, and by the way, the implicit association test is questionable, if you guys have heard of the IAT, but there are studies that do show, we have these unconscious biases. Are some people fragile about race? Sure. Are some whites fragile about race? Of course. So some people really are fragile in the sense she describes it. In other words, you try to talk about anything racial, like literally, and they don't want to talk about it. They want to shut you down. So that's a real phenomenon. But look, I'll be honest, there are Black people, Asian people, Hispanic people who have the same reaction. And so like Monique said, it's a human thing and we're all susceptible to it. And so I think she does not see it that way. So that's not what she's saying.